Entire question. A well-named guy, J.D. Gordon, former Defense Department spokesman and former chief foreign policy and national security advisor to presidential candidate Herman Cain. J.D., it's great to establish this J.D. to J.D. link again and have Miranda with us as well. You have written a column about what's going on at Gitmo, and it is costing us a fortune to run. What is the cost and why is it so high?
JD and Miranda, thanks so much for having me on the show today. I always like the JD to JD connection as well. You know, President Obama keeps saying it's $3 million a year per detainee, but you know what? That is the most intellectually dishonest piece of accounting you'll ever hear out of this administration. I've got a column this week in the Washington Times, the reason Gitmo is so expensive. And the bottom line is because even though we only have 122 detainees there now, most of that cost comes from the 2,000-member guard force and the medical force and the legal guys providing them with care, feeding, legal services. So when I was a Pentagon spokesman, JD, between 2005 and 2009, we had about 600 detainees and then down to 500, down to 400. But the guard force and the medical force and all the lawyers were still about 2,000. Well, that number is the same today. That's why it's so expensive. We got 2,000 guys taking care of these detainees, and there's only 122. So President Obama is deliberately keeping that cost high.
Well, J.D., when I was back on the campaign trail, I observed, in my point of view, now even in private life, no prisoner, no enemy combatant should be better fed, better clothed, better housed than the American troops guarding them. Do we have a situation where the prisoners are living high on the hog and it's tougher on those guards we have down at Gitmo?
Yes, JD, that's exactly right. That's a big piece of this. You know, the Guantanamo detainees have 4 halal meals a day. They're much more expensive than the meals we serve to our own guards. They have imported dates, imported honey, roasted meats, feasts for Ramadan. They're treated very well down there. And that's just the food. They've also got this $750,000 soccer field. They've got stationary bikes. They've even got Wii Fits, if you can believe it.
How unusual is that if you were just going to compare Gitmo to other prisons?
It's gold-plated,
like
Miranda.
Luxury.
I mean,
that sounds like a 4-star hotel.
Yeah, they have it so well because there was all this outcry from the international left about their human rights. And so what the administration did, both the Bush administration and the Obama administration, is they poured a ton of money into it. That's why it's so expensive, because these detainees have it so well.
And again, along those lines, correct me if I'm wrong, but this bears amplification, J.D. I believe you said each detainee has a personal doctor and a personal military lawyer. Why can't they share?
Yes, J.D., here's how it breaks down. There's a medical unit that's about 100 people down there. It's a rotating unit. It leaves every year, and then another unit comes to take its place. Well, there's only 122 detainees. Why do 122 detainees need a 100-person medical unit? That's basically like having their own personal doctor or nurse. I mean, that's really a shame if you think about it. Look, we had veterans die in the United States on these secret waiting lists.
As you're saying this, is all the vets that died because they were on this waiting list and couldn't see a doctor, and we're still hearing there's not enough doctors out there. So what will happen if this facility closes? Who will fit the bill? Real quickly.
The taxpayers won't save any money on that, because guess what? Those 2,000 military people aren't going to be fired. They'll just be transferred somewhere else. That's why the president is being so dishonest, because he says it's $3 million per detainee. Most of those costs are for the troop salaries and the operations to keep the troops there. The troops will just go somewhere else. So the taxpayers won't save anything. So the real cost is about probably 10% of what President Obama is really saying.
Well, listen, here's what we're going to have to do, JD. We're going to bring you back to talk more about this. We're coming right back. Let's continue our conversation with J.D. Gordon, former Defense Department spokesman and the former chief foreign policy and national security advisor to presidential Herman Cain a few years back. J.D., good to have you here. Obviously, there is more to the Gitmo situation. You talked about how the president, when he says $3 million spent per prisoner, it's because he's spending it with some exorbitant stuff.
That's right.
Now, there's some other things going on. First, a new book written by one of the inmates has been released. It allegedly details his life as a detainee. How will the release of this book affect Gitmo, do you think?
Well, I think it's going to gin up more support from the international left. He'll be looked at as a victim, even though the detainees there have killed cumulatively tens of thousands of people. You know, there was a document seized in a raid in Manchester, England called the Manchester Manual. It was an al-Qaeda training document. And it basically called for any al-Qaeda members and supporters to claim torture was inflicted. That's what they do because they know that the West sympathizes with that. So that's a weapon. It's a propaganda weapon. So that book is another piece of propaganda for the detainees and the international leftists who prop them up.
JD, I want to switch gears now. We talked about it in our Newsmax Now update. The Gitmo commander who has been relieved of duty, he's under investigation right now after the husband of a woman he allegedly had an affair with was found dead. What can you tell us about this investigation and how it could affect Gitmo?
Well, it's very serious. Anytime you have allegations like that, they're going to be investigated thoroughly. I think it's a distraction, unfortunately, because, you know, what's that got to do with the actual detainees down there? So it's a little bit of a red herring, but I think the investigation should go forth and we'll see what it says.
And JD, with your experience at the Pentagon and advising candidates for the White House and, of course, what you think may happen on the Hill, do you expect someone on the Armed Services Committee to introduce legislation to rein in the cost of incarceration for these enemy combatants and at least make sure that our military guarding them have meals and conditions in which to live at least as good as what the enemy combatants get? We got a couple of minutes remaining.
JD, I hope so. I hope that you and I can convince the Congress to hold hearings right away to try to rein in that spending. If there's 2,000 people there taking care of them, why are there just not 300? I mean, if we had 2,000 to take care of 600, why 2,000 to take care of 122? The Guard force ought to be trimmed right away. And also, about a quarter of those costs, the cost was $397 million for all of Guantanamo detainee operations in 2014. 1/4 of those costs were for the Office of Military Commissions, which is a couple hundred lawyers, paralegals, support staff in the Washington, D.C. area. Well, they go down there frequently to see clients. But here's the thing, JD. During the Bush administration, we were talking about 60 to 70 trials. Obama has let a lot of those guys go, so there's only a handful of trials. Why do you need a few hundred lawyers and paralegals? That's a quarter of the cost. So that office either ought to be pared down or moved to Gitmo, but it should be only about 10% of what it is today. That's another reason the cost is high. President Obama is deliberately misleading the American people on Gitmo costs.
And again, you have a column detailing this, prepared for publication in the Washington Times. J.D. Gordon, as always, you have our thanks, and we'll continue to monitor the story. Miranda, it's kind of interesting. We get talking about these public policy moves. We see the President of the State of the Union, and a whole lot of folks are saying they can't wait to 2016. And along those lines, apparently now Mitt Romney and Jeb Bush are going to meet in Utah this week to discuss just who might run for president.
It could be a fly on a wall.
Wouldn't that be interesting?
Yeah.
Well, people have a chance, not so much to suppose what will happen in that meeting, but they'll have a chance to tell us who they think ought to run. Our Newsmax poll question today: who should the GOP nominate for president in 2016? You like Jeb or Mitt or somebody else? You can vote in our poll, newsmax.com/poll. Coming up, Tim Graham on some media malpractice.